sweeping proposal to cut taxes for individuals and corporations. It is a plan, the president says, is going to help middle-class families and jumpstart the American economy. Good morning to you. I'm John Scott.
But I have a feeling not everyone says that.
I think there are detractors out there. Yes.
One or two. I'm Heather Childers. Thank you for joining us. So the president is set to break down the plans for rewriting the tax code. He's expected to call for a simpler system, fewer tax brackets, itemized deductions, along with a cut to the corporate tax rate to stimulate economic growth.
If we do this, we will create millions of new jobs for our people and bring many, many businesses back to our shores. We will become a competitive nation again. We won't see companies leaving our country, firing their people, and going and then selling their product, by the way, back into our country with no tax and no retribution. That will all stop. It's time for both parties to come together and do what is right for the American people and the nation that we all love.
Well, Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live for us with some more details. So, John, can they all come together?
Well, we'll see, Heather. I should point out, too, that they're laying the sod from the construction project behind me here at the White House. So fingers crossed they're getting very close to the end of all the noise in behind us. We'll see if Congress can come together on this. The president believes he can get bipartisan support. That's one of the points he's going to be making in the 3 o'clock hour this afternoon in that speech in Indianapolis, where he will lay out his proposals for tax reform. Let's put them up on the screen so you can follow along. The president will create 3 tax brackets, 12%, 25%, and 35%. That 12% is actually a 2% rise from the current 10% for the lowest income earners. But the White House insists that people will pay 0 tax on more of their income, and that'll offset that, and as well increasing the standard deduction there to $12,000 for an individual and $24,000 for a married couple will also mean that they'll get more money back in their pocket. We're told this morning that the average middle income family will get back about $1,000. The corporate tax rate will be reduced from 35 to 20%. We are told that that is a red line for the president. He's not going to accept a corporate rate higher than that. The pass-through rate for so-called S-corps or a lot of small businesses will be reduced to 25%. People who have those type of businesses right now pay tax at a personal income tax rate. There will also be an increase in the child tax credit. That's to be determined in committee. It's currently $1,000. The president says it will be more than that. The president's plan will also eliminate the so-called marriage penalty, eliminate the death tax, eliminate most itemized deductions, but it will keep the mortgage and charitable deductions. The president making clear that this is not a tax cut for the rich. In fact, by eliminating many deductions, the highest rate earners will come out about even though their marginal rate goes down. And the president is holding out the possibility that the very tippy-top income earners may actually end up paying more. Meeting with the bipartisan members of the Ways and Means Committee yesterday, the president laid out his driving principles. Listen here.
First, we must make our tax code simple and fair. It's too complicated. Second, we will cut taxes tremendously for the middle class, not just a little bit, but tremendously. Third, we will lower tax rates for businesses to create more jobs and higher wages for Americans. Finally, we want to bring back trillions of dollars in wealth parked overseas. We want this money invested right here in America.
And again, the president believes that he can get some bipartisan support on this. An area where he could not get even Republican support was health care. To bring back our favorite reference from the movie The Princess Bride, the Graham Cassidy Act is now all dead, not just mostly dead. But the president is holding out hope that in the next fiscal year, which begins on October the 1st, he might revisit it again, tweeting out this morning, quote, "We will have the votes for health care, but not for the reconciliation deadline of Friday, after which we need 60. Get rid of filibuster rule." And then the president sending out this mysterious tweet saying, quote, "With 1 yes vote in hospital and very positive signs from Alaska and 2 others, McCain is out, we have the health care vote, but not for Friday." We did a little digging. The person in the hospital he's referring to is Mississippi Senator Thad Cochran. A lot of people didn't know he was in the hospital. So don't know how the president, Heather, is going to get the votes to do health care after the Friday deadline, but he seems to have something of a plan. So we should point out the last 2 didn't work out very well.
Interesting, though, they've been talking about bipartisan partisan approach. I have to say, though, John Roberts, we did not know that you were a fan of The Princess Bride, but now we know.
Come on. The Princess Bride, Star Wars, metaphors for everything. I put out the Star Wars metaphor for Steve Bannon in the Roy Moore victory last night. Like Obi-Wan Kenobi said, if you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. And it seems Bannon is living up to that.
I think you could just go on and on. Thank you so much, John. Appreciate it.
I'm going to have to work some Princess Bride quotes into my reporting from now on. Hey, President Trump is congratulating former Alabama Chief Justice Roy Moore on his Republican victory Friday night. I'm sorry, victory last night. I'm not sure where I got that. Moore defeating the president's pick, Luther Strange, by 10 points in the Senate primary race. Strange thanked the president for his endorsement, while Roy Moore says he supports President Trump.
I want to thank the President of the United States. Let's thank the President. The President took a chance. He didn't have to come down. I'm sure he'll be criticized for coming to campaign for me. That's what loyal friends do. Sometimes it's more than politics. Sometimes it's about just a friendship to make the country better.
Together we can make America great. We can support the President. Don't let anybody in the press think that because he supported my, not support him and support his agenda. As long as it's constitutional.
Joining us now, Michael Shearer, national political reporter for The Washington Post. Michael, thanks for being here. I want to read the headline that your paper put on top of your article. It says, Moore with Senate primary dealing blow to GOP. Why is this considered a Republican Party?
Because the established party, which includes a number of Washington, the Senate and House leadership, and towards the end of this race, White House advisors and the president have been seeking some sort of coherence. They want to build a body in the Senate that they can more ably control, so that when things like tax reform come up, when things like Obamacare repeal and replace come up, it's easier for them to wrangle the votes they need to get things through. Roy Moore ran against that establishment, and he has promised to be a very disruptive force, more along the lines of someone like Senator Rand Paul or Ted Cruz from Texas, when he gets to the Senate. So there was millions of dollars that were put into this race by very deep-pocketed Republican groups to try and prop up Strange, to try and stop Moore, and in the end that failed.
It was such a weird race because the president's recently departed senior advisor, Steve Bannon, was supporting Moore while the president was supporting Strange.
It was very strange. And in Alabama, the president, support for the president was never in debate. As you showed in those clips, both Roy Moore and Luther Strange had only nice things to say about the president. Both promised to support the president's agenda. What happened was, as a strategy, Luther Strange latched onto the president's endorsement as the way to win voters. And enough voters in Alabama didn't think that a vote for Moore was a vote against Trump. They thought you could support Trump and support Moore at the same time, even though Trump was campaigning for his opponent. And when the president went down on Friday to campaign for Strange, he kind of hinted at that as well. He said, I'll come back and support Moore if he wins the election. He also said, I may have made a mistake, sort of giving a little bit of permission to more supporters to go ahead with their vote.
And if you're Mitch McConnell and your political organization has dumped $9 million into the race supporting Luther Strange and all that money is gone now, that's not a good sign.
It's not a good sign, and particularly heading into 2018, when we're going to have a number of other Republican Senate incumbents facing these same sort of anti-establishment challengers in the primaries. Now, since 2014, Mitch McConnell and his team, writ large, has been very successful in beating back what we then called Tea Party challengers. They won in the primaries. This is the first time that an anti-incumbent primary has been lost that McConnell's gone all in on. And so it bodes poorly for states like Arizona, Nevada, Mississippi, where we're going to have replays of this Steve Bannon anti-establishment crowd campaigning against Mitch McConnell and leadership in Washington.
Well, I suppose if the Republican favorite ended up losing this primary, the Democrats are probably reacting with glee. But if there is this anti-establishment fervor out there in the country, it could bite the Democrats as well.
It could. I mean, the Democrats are dealing with it as well. You saw that in the primaries last year with the Bernie Sanders insurgency. You know, the Democratic Party is not quite divided in the same way as the Republican Party. It still remains a far more coherent party. But on policy debates, you have a real disagreement. And the Democrats are going to have to find a way of creating a message going into 2018 that unifies, you know, everyone from Joe Manchin in West Virginia and in Massachusetts.
But, you know, Roy Moore is against the same thing, you know, a lot of the same, or, you know, is a proponent of a lot of the same things that the president likes. He likes the building of a wall. He likes, you know, a more cohesive, balanced budget approach, or, you know, less profligate spending. He likes a stronger military. Why would the president automatically not support a guy like Roy Moore?
Well, I don't think it was automatic. I think that the president thought about it. I think he did have a personal relationship with Luther Strange that helped him, and he was getting advice from people around McConnell to get involved in this race. There are other parts, though, where Moore does not support the president. You know, Moore said he would vote against Graham Cassidy, the Obamacare repeal and replace bill that died this week, which the president supported. You know, the president made a lot of waves a few weeks ago when he made a deal with Democrats to prevent a government shutdown. Moore said he's more disposed to supporting government shutdowns over things like continued funding of Planned Parenthood. So, you know, it's not like, even though the broad agenda of the president is supported by Moore, there's the real possibility in the coming months when Trump wants to get a bill through the Senate, he's not going to just have to deal with people like Cruz and Rand Paul. He's going to have to worry about Roy Moore's vote as well.
And when you have guys named Moore and Strange, it gets a little hard to work them into a conversation about politics sometimes, doesn't it?
They're like Alabama politics.
All right. Michael Scherer, Washington Post. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
It's more and more strange, right?
Yeah.
Well, some brand new information about O.J. Simpson. Parole board now says that it did not consider when making a decision to free him. Plus, we're live on Capitol Hill as lawmakers get ready to tackle tax reform, with the president revealing a new plan months in the making.
We will cut taxes tremendously for the middle class, not just a little bit, but tremendously.
A Fox News alert on the new tax reform plan, with House Republicans taking a road trip, leaving Capitol Hill for a closed retreat on the issue. All while President Trump gets ready to speak about tax reform at an event in Indianapolis just a few hours from now. But some details of the plan emerged yesterday when the president personally appealed to House lawmakers to get behind this proposal.
Our plan is based on 4 very crucial principles. First, we must make our tax code simple and fair. It's too complicated. People can't do it. American taxpayers waste 6 billion hours each year complying with the tax code. Under our plan, the vast majority of Americans will be able to file their tax return on a single page without extra record keeping and all of that paperwork. So we're going to make it very, very simple. It's called simplification.
Joining us now, Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas, the Senate Majority Whip. Senator, it's good of you to spend some time with us today.
Thanks, John.
The president likes simplification. What do you like about this proposal?
Well, what I like the most about it is it's going to allow hardworking keep more of their paycheck and increase their take-home pays, and they can spend that money on things they want rather than have the government take a big bite out of their paycheck. It will literally lower the costs of living for all Americans across the board, and simplification, I think, is an extra bonus.
What do you say to the charge that it is, you know, a tax break for the rich?
Well, that's just not true. That is predictable that our opponents will say that, but it's not true. What we want to do is make sure everybody who pays taxes sees a reduction in their tax costs and increases their take-home pay. And we want to boost the economy in the process, create incentives for investment and job creation, which are going to benefit the vast cross-section of middle America.
Every time, you know, we have the tax code we have because so many lobbyists and Others get their fingers on the tax code and make it so complicated because everybody wants their own slice of the pie. How do you avoid that from happening?
Well, you're exactly right. That's the reason why it's become so complex, and that's why rates have gotten higher in order to generate the income with so many deductions and credits and other things, which I call the underbrush in our tax code that needs to get cleared out. When you hear people talk about base broadening, they're talking about reducing those so we can bring down overall rates, which will benefit everybody. But this has to happen every couple decades or so. The last time we did this was 1986, because right now the tax code has become so complex and so larded with deductions and credits and the like that are the product of people working through their lobbyists here on Capitol Hill, that we need to reduce rates for everybody, eliminate those deductions and subsidies as much as possible, and economy growing again. This will be the best economic stimulus I think we could possibly pass here in Washington, D.C.
So the proposal is to take the corporate tax rate as well down from 35% to 20%. First of all, do you think you can get that passed? Can you get it through both houses of Congress? And if you do, what does that mean for the economy writ large?
Well, John, right now we're non-competitive because we're the highest tax rate in the world. Other countries have learned that if they lower rates and they're more competitive, they can attract business, literally move from the United States to places like Ireland and elsewhere where the tax rates are lower. So ultimately, this benefits everybody by keeping those businesses here, by having that investment here, creating those jobs, and helping to grow our economy rather than to grow the economy of other countries around the world, because we have the highest tax rate in the world.
The idea being that if you generate more economic activity, you generate income to replace the taxation that is lost?
No question about it. We need to get our economy growing again. It's been pretty anemic since the Great Recession of 2008. Now it's roughly 1.8, 1.9%, which is too low even to generate enough jobs to get full employment. And a lot of people have simply given up looking for work because it hadn't been available. So what we'd like to do is get the economy growing again, get people more take-home pay, and that will benefit all Americans.
So I'll give you 30 seconds here to make your best pitch. You got a few million Americans watching right now. What is your best pitch as to why they should like this proposal?
We want a simpler tax code that will put more pay in your pocket when you take it home, and that will reduce your cost of living so that you can spend your money on your family, not have government spend it for you. And this is really all about pursuing the American dream.
Senator John Cornyn, Texas. Good to have you on. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
More money in your pocket, always a good argument.
I like money in my pocket.
I like that.
I don't have any right now.
Yeah, we'll take that. Well, coming up 1 week after Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico, some of the victims say that they've received little to no help. 3 million people on the island are without power or running water. We'll have a live report from San Juan. And while addressing students at Georgetown University, Attorney General Jeff Sessions announcing the Justice Department will get more involved in free speech complaints on college campuses. The Associate Attorney General for the Justice Department joins us ahead on this. Stay with us.
Freedom of thought and speech on American campus are under attack.
Right now, new information on some crime stories we're watching. Court action for the suspect in a deadly shooting rampage at a Tennessee church this weekend. He's accused of a lot at the Burnett Chapel Church of Christ and wounding 6 others inside the church. An arrest in a bizarre murder case in Florida that dates back more than a quarter of a century. Police picked up a woman in Virginia, they say dressed up as a clown, walked up to a home and fatally shot the woman who answered the door. Detectives reopened the case 3 years ago. The woman they just arrested had gone on to marry the man whose wife was murdered. A new disclosure concerning what might be an oversight regarding O.J. Simpson's parole weeks before he's set to be released from a Nevada prison. The parole board's hearing officer says the panel did not consider O.J.'s 1989 misdemeanor conviction for spousal abuse because the case was not listed in the National Clearinghouse of FBI crime data. He says it's impossible to know whether that might have changed the board's decision.
They should have listened to Greg Jarrett. He told us about that several times. Well, Justin, some strong reactions to response to Attorney General's Jeff Sessions' speech at Georgetown Law School yesterday. Well, he announced that the Justice Department would begin ramping up its support of those who sue public universities claiming a violation of their free speech rights. Listen.
Who decides what is offensive and what is acceptable? The university is about the search for truth, not the imposition of truth by a government censor. Civility codes often violate what the late Justice Antonin Scalia rightly called, quote, the first axiom of the First Amendment, which is that, quote, as a general rule, the state has no power to ban speech on the basis of content.
Rachel Brand is Associate Attorney General for the Justice Department, and she joins us now with some more insight. Thank you for joining us, first of all.
Thank you for having me.
So let's get right to what's happening today. There's a group of Georgetown University professors, and they've come together. They've signed a letter saying that this was hypocritical of the Attorney General in light of what's happening with free speech and the conversation around the NFL. The Attorney General was on Fox and Friends earlier today, and he answered that argument. Here's what he had to say about that.
I do. I think people should stand. I think it should be a formal rule of the league. You have to make that decision, but they should be able to say to the players, if you're on our field, in our game, paid by us, you should respect the flag and the national anthem.
So he thinks that they should stand, his personal opinion, but he thinks that the players or the owners in the league should have a right to tell them that they do have to. What do you think? Was it hypocritical, the two, talking about free speech and giving this speech at the same time all this is going on?
Well, I think this is a great example of a public debate. This is exactly the kind of issue that we want to have one side of the issue, another side of the issue, all views aired. But what we want to talk about here is free speech on college campus. We're really seeing an attack on free speech all across America, whether it's Berkeley, which you've seen in the news, whether it's the public college in Michigan, where students were actually put in jail for handing out copies of the Constitution on campus, or whether it's the students this morning at University of Utah threatening to shut down a speaker with whom they disagree. We really want to shine a light on that really important civil rights question.
And the point that you just made, I found it interesting, the phrase that the Attorney General had for that. He called it the heckler's veto.
Right.
And that's when, you know, in protest threatens to disrupt a speech, and as a result, their invitation, if they're set to be a speaker, is withdrawn, something like that. Do you think, though, that free speech is under attack, or is conservative speech under attack more?
Well, I think when any view is shut out, that's an attack on free speech. Lately, we've been seeing more cases where conservative views are being shut down, but it's just as much of a problem for us at the Department of Justice if a liberal view is shut down. Speech needs to be protected when it's unpopular, because eventually everybody's speech is going to be unpopular.
Yeah. Speaking specifically to the public universities, he also made a point that about 33% of public institutions have a speech code that constricts freedom of speech in some way. He pointed out to Boise State, they have one in Idaho. Also, the University of South Carolina has one as well. But then the question is, you know, who determines appropriate speech and what is not? We run into that area.
Right. Professors and college administrators are creating a situation where everyone is view with which they disagree. Anything that makes somebody feel uncomfortable or offended is shut down. Everyone is going to say something at some point in their life that offends somebody, but everyone needs to be protected in their right to express themselves freely.
Yeah, because people say that some speech does not deserve to be protected. And then also the announcement that was made that the DOJ is prepared to do more. What exactly is the Justice Department prepared to do?
Well, just yesterday we filed a brief in a case against Georgia Gwinnett College. This is a public college in Georgia. This is a case where a college had a very small free speech zone on campus. A student got a permit to go speak in the free speech zone. He was talking about his Christian faith. He made somebody feel uncomfortable, and a school official came and said to him, "You cannot speak." So he sued the university, and we filed a brief explaining to the court why that violates the First Amendment. We're going to do more of those cases. We're actively working on that now, and if people know of more of those cases, we hope they'll bring them to our attention.
All right. Thank you so much, Rachel. We appreciate you joining us. Rachel Brand, thanks.
The next step in the health care battle, GOP's last-ditch effort to repeal and replace Obamacare has collapsed. And Republican Senator Lamar Alexander is pushing bipartisan talks, what he hopes lawmakers can accomplish and why they're facing a tight deadline. Also, hurricane-ravaged Puerto Rico now facing critical shortages of food, water, and fuel, as some survivors say the recovery effort is a do-it-yourself kind of thing. We're live in some of the areas hardest hit.
They don't have water, they don't have light, they don't have so many things that they need.
Right now, growing concerns about a humanitarian crisis in hurricane-ravaged Puerto Rico, where many survivors say they are still waiting for help, even though thousands of U.S. federal workers are on the island helping with the recovery effort. That deadly storm cut a wide path of devastation, leaving nearly all 3.4 million people on the island without power and most without water.
I stayed in my, most of the hurricane, I stayed in my bathroom. I have a bathroom that doesn't have windows, and I stay there. And I also have to refugee my neighbor because he cut his hand, so I have to give him the first aid. We stayed in the bathroom during all the hurricane because I thought that the windows were going to blow away. It was really, really, really hard. The winds was really, really hard.
Garrett Tenney is live in Catano, Puerto Rico now. Garrett?
Yeah, John, we're now on day 7 since Hurricane Maria hit, and despite that abundance of supplies that has been coming into the country, most folks we've spoken to say at this point things are not getting any better. And right now we are just west of the capital in the town of Catano, and you can see there are still long lines of folks to get a little bit of gas that have been waiting here for hours. This area was one of the hardest hit by flooding, and you can see in some of the neighborhoods we were at earlier today that the side streets are still covered by a foot of water or more in some places, and that's a week later. This man told us that he's staying home to protect the few belongings that he has from looters while his wife is staying in a shelter as they wait for help.
Bueno, increíble, pero estamos vivos.
It's incredible, but we are alive. There's no describable. Very difficult.
Increíble, pero cierto.
Incredible.
Pero estamos vivos.
But we're alive.
While most of the country is still waiting on that help, we're also hearing countless stories of neighbors and strangers reaching out to help each other with the very things that they lack, like food, water, and cell phones to call family members and see how they're doing.
People have been extremely kind. Yesterday I was walking around with an empty water gallon and somebody came out of a yoga business and just asked me if I wanted to fill it up at their place. People being very generous with food and stuff. So I've been surprised by the generosity of people, even though they're in a bad situation here.
And communications continue to be a major issue and a major point of frustration for folks here. I spoke to one woman this morning who said it has been nearly 2 weeks since she's been able to speak with her brother who lives in the Western Territory, and she says all she wants more than anything is to speak with him, to let him know that she's okay, and to make sure that he is doing okay as well. John?
Wow, unbelievable. Garrett Tenney. Garrett, thank you.
Well, this just in on the battle over health care, with Republican Senator Lamar Alexander restarting bipartisan talks to stabilize health insurance markets and bring down premiums one day after the GOP's last-ditch effort to repeal Obamacare collapsed. Joining us now, David Avella, he's the chairman of GOPAC, and Simon Rosenberg. He is the president and founder of NDN and former Bill Clinton campaign advisor. Thank you both for joining us.
Good morning.
So let's get to what John Roberts talked about at the very beginning of the news. This just crossed about 4 hours ago a tweet from President Trump where he said, with one yes vote and very positive signs from Alaska and 2 others, McCain is out, we have the help, but not for Friday. So, David, I'll let you start with this. What do you think he's talking about, and what are the chances of this coming up with a plan?
They have an obligation to the American people to pass a health care plan, and let's hope the president is right and that the votes are starting to get there to put a system in place that is better than Obamacare, because we know that is a disaster. And as I just said, we have an obligation to the American people to make a better health care system than the direction we're going, just as Congress and the president has an obligation to give tax cuts to Americans, as we campaigned to do last year during the elections, and that will jumpstart this economy. So tax cuts and a better health care system. Luckily, that's what we're focused on.
Well, it sounds good, but we've been focused on that for a while, Simon. I mean, this specific group that we're talking about, they're called HELP, the HELP Committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, and they've apparently been working on this plan ever since July, when the initial, full repeal collapsed. So what do you think about their chances?
Well, and there's been similar as well. There have been Democrats and Republicans meeting on a similar path in the House. So, look, I'm optimistic. I mean, I think the most important thing that can happen in the short term is that the administration has to be very careful to not make it look like they're sabotaging the current system. If there isn't a new system in place, all of us must make the current system work as well as it can, make sure as many people get health insurance. And by cutting the length of time for the registration down, for stopping the advertising, if there's a big drop in the number of people with insurance, that's going to be on the Republican Party for having, wrecked the current system as opposed to having replaced it with something better. And so my hope is that these efforts in both the House and the Senate bear fruit, and that we make some improvements in the current system as we debate going forward in an even better system going forward.
Yeah, let's just hope that's not rotten fruit. David, as we just said, that's true. Conservatives, they will be disappointed if the ACL of the land. Also, at the same time, what if Republicans can continue to oppose it with elections?
Well, as we just saw in the Alabama Senate special, voters are looking for results out of the Republican Congress, and we have an obligation to pass it. I will say, though, that it's somewhat chuckle to hear Simon talking about somehow Republicans would be in charge given the blame for health care collapsing when insurer after insurer leaves states because they can't operate under Obamacare. The number of doctors gets worse as Obamacare continues to be implemented. The best thing that can happen to this healthcare system until new legislation is put in place is governors and state legislatures need to ask Tom Price, the HHS secretary, for waivers so states can go create better systems than what we're getting currently under Obamacare.
All right. We will see. You are fired up, David, for sure today. David Such.
Thank you.
Sure.
The Taliban claims responsibility for an attack on an airport in Afghanistan, firing off rockets and grenades ahead. The high-ranking U.S. official who was the apparent target of that attack. Plus, folks rushing to this man's aid after he paraglided right into some power lines, why he was able to keep a clear head and make sure no one else got hurt.
I heard like this loud bang, bang, like 3 bangs. And I was like, okay, that sounded like a transformer going off.
A crazy and dangerous Pittsburgh, Florida, as a paraglider flies into some power lines, knocking out power to more than 30 homes. The man, who happens to be a firefighter, was able to keep his composure, urging folks to stand back despite this.
I can't feel your legs at all.
He was hospitalized and treated for burns. No word on him.
Well, Justin, Defense Secretary James Mattis, the apparent target of a failed terror attack in Afghanistan today, now issuing a stern warning for the taking responsibility.
Through our partnership, we will suffocate any hope that al-Qaeda or ISIS, Daesh, Haqqani, or the Taliban have of winning by killing. I want to reinforce to the Taliban that the only path to peace and political legitimacy for them is through a negotiated settlement. We welcome those who commit to a peaceful future for Afghanistan. We support Afghan-led reconciliation as the solution to this conflict, and the sooner the Taliban recognizes they cannot win with bombs, the sooner the killing will end.
Well, a U.S. official says that the terror group fired as many as 45 rockets and grenades at the airport where Mattis just arrived 2 hours earlier. And Connor Powell is live for us from Jerusalem with the latest on this. Connor?
Yeah, the Kabul International Airport lasted for more than 5 hours, but Mattis was never really in any real danger. He had arrived about 2 hours earlier before the attack began and had already taken a helicopter over to the presidential compound to meet with Afghan President Ashraf Ghani. So he was long cleared out of that area when the attack actually began. But the Taliban said they were targeting the Secretary of Defense, and they managed to do some damage to the overall compound and infrastructure there. There was a weapons depot that caught fire. Several planes were also slightly damaged. There are reports in the Afghan media that there were some civilians outside the airport that were also injured as well, although that's not fully confirmed in terms of how many were actually injured. The big question is, did the Taliban get tipped off that Secretary Mattis was coming to Afghanistan to launch this attack? Mattis was in India the day before. It's pretty common for U.S. officials to visit Afghanistan when they're in the region. And when that big plane landed, there was a pretty good reason to think that the Taliban knew that Mattis could be in the area and that they were waiting to see if a big plane was coming. So the type of inside job. Still, it was a serious attack on a place where the security is very tight generally, because it is not only the civilian airport for Afghanistan, but it's also a military airport. Secretary Mattis